Hi, my name is Mimosa Reed, and I am creating a podcast today on Shakespeare and feminism and its relations to history and modern day. While the perspective of this isn't necessarily always a feminist one, which I think anything that is going for women's rights is feminism, but it's just talking about women's treatment historically and how the treatment in Shakespeare reflects today and its connection to everything. Women before and during Shakespeare's time were oppressed, were not listened to often, were not believed. Their opinions or their words were not valued the same as men. They were treated as property, unlike men. Women were not able to work. Women were specifically caregivers to children, homemakers, things along the lines of that, but did not have any place in careers, in work, in anything that was to put a woman in position of power, especially over a man. And oppression didn't affect all women the same, but generally many women suffered. So we want to talk about how women generally experience things rather than just considering queens or women who were husbands to lords or things like that. The first play I'm going to be talking about today in relation to the treatment of women would be Othello. The best way to start discussion about Othello and Desdemona would be to consider what had happened during the story. So to recap would be that Othello is told by Iago that he is suspicious of Desdemona cheating on Othello with Cassio, which is one of his friends. Iago's reasons for planting this evidence was to hurt Othello. This was motivated by, you can consider racism and just general hate. It could be a mixture of both. We don't totally understand Iago's reasons, but at the same time, this is not what we're talking about. I think the more important thing is that even though that these things were not true and were told to Othello in confidence by somebody he believed, I think that his reaction alone to Desdemona should speak on its own. Othello is a great husband, and that's what it should be believed because he does love his wife. But instead of talking to his wife, Othello listens to Iago, who he really doesn't know. And it is concerning that somebody would put so much more faith into a strange man's word against his own wife's. I think this is the first hint to an issue that women face. This is just one of many, but I think this is the first one that really shows in Othello that Othello would rather listen to a man's word over his own wife's because he values what this man has to say over his wife. He does not give Desdemona any chance to explain. He never tells her after Iago comes to him about this information. He does not give Desdemona time to explain herself. He does not give her a chance to put a word in. And as Othello goes into this kind of madness, considering himself to be a cuckold because of what he thinks that Desdemona does, he eventually kills her because of his irrational behavior just ends up building up. And I don't think anybody around him has enough guts to say anything to him about his irrational behavior because they just can't talk him out of it, and he genuinely and fully believes that he has been betrayed by his wife, who has given him no reason, and he has given no explanation to either for her to have cheated. It's very clear that they both really love each other and care about each other, but Othello clearly does not respect Desdemona the same way he would Iago because he doesn't even give her a chance to explain herself. I think in more rational relationships, especially today, I feel like that was not a possibility for women before. Maybe not even in the last 100 years that women have had the chance to sit down and have proper discussions with people, have the right to explain themselves, and just not be judged immediately by somebody just because of another man's word. A woman should be able to explain herself and should be, if she's like telling a story about if she has had done something with a man or not, I think that she has the right to be believed. But because of this fear of being cheated on by men throughout these stories, it's just easier for them to go along with the idea that they have been cheated on and getting rid of their wives so that they just don't have to consider if they have or haven't. And it's just too hard for them to have to actually believe their wives. They'd rather just have total control. So this situation was based off of Iago's desire to intervene with Othello's life since he was so successful and he got a position that he had wanted. And I guess that this is something that, some people would be upset about, but it's an irrational anger. Iago, I don't know if you would even consider him to be understanding of what he is doing to Desdemona. You don't really get an insight onto that because, well, like, he doesn't really discuss it, but it almost seems as Iago doesn't really care for what he's doing to Desdemona because it just matters more to him that he'd hurt Othello. And I think in that view, it does show how little he respects her as a woman because she's so disposable. Her life in exchange to hurt Othello's life doesn't seem like a big deal. And I guess, like, Iago may have not thought, well, oh, I didn't think he would kill his wife, but I think he should have considered all outcomes. If that wasn't his intention, then it should have been a consideration. So Iago is just treating Desdemona as a disposable person who can be used as a tool to intervene with Othello's life. I think the main thing that we have to understand here about what could have prevented Desdemona and ultimately Othello's death is that Othello should have had a conversation with his wife. If he would have had enough respect for Desdemona as his wife, and if he would have considered her his equal, which he did not, then he would have gotten the truth from her right away. I believe anybody could understand that a handkerchief could be misplaced or stolen, and so for somebody just to assume that because another person has a handkerchief is proof that his wife is cheating is just bizarre, and I think ultimately that's what it comes down to with Othello. I think this issue can still be seen to this day because we often hear stories of men killing women whenever they're married because of wanting to separate, general unhappiness, wanting to have a new relationship with another person, falling out of love. For some reason, there are on occasion men who believe that it is easier to kill their wives because of various reasons, and it's just very odd that it is still not spoken about at times. An example of this modern day would be the Watts family murder. This man named Christopher Watts, he murdered his wife and 2 daughters, and I think that this is a prime example of a man thinking that it just would be easier to, like, remove his family from the situation so that he can have a new life, when rather, I think everybody could believe that, his family has a right to life as well. And I actually saw a lot of things on the internet that had suggested that she had done something to drive him so crazy to need to do that, and implied that she deserved her murder, his wife. As a woman today, it's really hard to have to hear about a woman being blamed for her own murder, as well as on top that there are children involved. And so it just amazes me that there could be excuses or just, concerns of like, oh, well, what had she done? I think that, in Christopher Watts's case, it should be looked at as like he is a man who is responsible for his own actions. If he didn't love his wife anymore, he should have just left. And whenever I'm comparing this to Othello and Desdemona, it does remind me of things in similar ways. Obviously, it's not totally aligned, but the outcome is just so bizarre in both cases that you just can't seem to get over, like, how did you get from point A and then how are we here now? For me as well, it is extremely hard to deal with the events leading up to Desdemona's death. It feels very romanticized to me, which is not the feeling I get. I get this very morbid feeling whenever I consider all of the events leading up to Desdemona's death. Right before Desdemona dies, it seems like she is really willing to deal with the idea that she is going to be killed by Othello, and she doesn't necessarily mind, and I think it's because she loves him, and her desire for her to love him is stronger than her desire to live. And for me, I just can't make that connection. I think that this outcome is so unfair to women, as it's expected that, oh, a woman has to die in order to prove her love to a man. And the fact that it's romanticized that she was so willing to succumb to his death is what I kind of interpret as this romanticization, I think, for men, but a little bit of that can be picked up by women as well, because women have to take in all of these events that men put out. But now society has interpreted this as like almost a romantic thing that she was so willing to die at her husband's hand. But I think that in the reality it's just wrong. Women in these stories make the ultimate sacrifices for their husbands, which almost comes or does come to their life. And I don't think that is a fair trade.